50 kilometers northeast of Mexico City, the valley floor opens into something that does not behave the way the rest of the landscape does. You notice it first as a change in the quality of the air. The surrounding hills are scrubby and dry, covered with agave and low brush that clings to the thin volcanic soil. The light at midday is flat and hard, but when you step onto the ancient processional road that bisects the site, a straight, wide corridor aligned almost exactly north to south, the scale of what is arranged around you takes a moment to fully register. To the north, a pyramid so large that early Spanish explorers, arriving in the 16th century, assumed it was a natural hill. To the south, another pyramid, smaller but still imposing. Between them, running the entire length of the central avenue, temples and platforms stepping up on both sides in measured intervals. The road itself is enormous. It is roughly 40 meters wide in its broadest sections and extends for more than 4 kilometers. The Aztecs, who arrived here centuries after the city had been abandoned, gave the road a name, Micaotli, the Avenue of the Dead. They did not build this city, they found it. What they found was already ancient by the time the Aztec Empire emerged. The Great Pyramids were already overgrown. The painted plaster on the walls had begun to flake. The population that had once made this the largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas, a city that at its peak housed more people than Rome, had been gone for centuries. The Aztecs named the whole complex Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods, or the place where the gods were created. The translation is genuinely ambiguous depending on how you read the Nahuatl. That ambiguity is not accidental. It reflects something real about this site. Almost everything here resists a single clean interpretation. We know the dimensions of the pyramids. We can date the construction phases within a rough margin. We have excavated thousands of objects from the site and mapped its underground features with modern instrumentation. And yet the name of the people who built it, their actual name for themselves, in their own language, is unknown. Their written records, if they kept any, have not been found. The political structure that organized and sustained a city of perhaps 125,000 people for over 5 centuries left no king lists, no royal inscriptions, no founding myths recorded in their own hand. They built one of the largest cities in the ancient world. Then they vanished from the historical record so completely that we still do not know what they called themselves. That is the question this investigation begins with, not the pyramids, the absence. According to conventional history, Teotihuacan rose as a major urban center sometime around the 1st century BC in the basin of Mexico, a high-altitude plateau roughly 2,200 meters above sea level, ringed by volcanic peaks and drained by a now-vanished lake system. The site had been occupied before that. Archaeological evidence shows small settlements in the area stretching back several centuries. But the explosive growth that transformed a collection of villages into a metropolis happened in a compressed period, within roughly 2 to 3 generations, by the best current estimates. Researchers generally agree that the catalyst for this growth was, at least in part, a volcanic eruption. Around 50 AD, the Popocatépetl volcano, located roughly 70 kilometers to the southeast, erupted with sufficient force to make the competing regional center of Cuicuilco, a city with its own pyramid and a substantial population, essentially uninhabitable. Refugees, and the political vacuum their migration created, may have redirected the demographic and economic energy of the entire basin toward the site that would become Teotihuacan. The city grew rapidly. By approximately 100 AD, it already had a population in the tens of thousands. By 200 AD, construction of the 2 main pyramids and the Avenue of the Dead was substantially complete. By 400 to 500 AD, the city was functioning as a regional superpower. Its artistic and commercial influence documented as far away as the Yucatan Peninsula, the Gulf Coast, and what is now Guatemala. Archaeologists currently believe the city was organized around a remarkable degree of urban planning. The grid layout, streets running in perpendicular alignments derived from the main avenue, was established early and maintained consistently across centuries of construction. The city was divided into districts or barrios, some of which appear to have housed distinct ethnic or occupational communities. One district shows evidence of Zapotec migrants from Oaxaca. Another shows material culture consistent with Gulf Coast populations. Teotihuacan was, in other words, apparently cosmopolitan, a city that drew migrants and merchants from across Mesoamerica, organized them into functional neighborhoods, and integrated them into a productive urban economy. The economy itself was formidable. The city controlled access to the largest deposits of obsidian in Mesoamerica, a volcanic glass sharper than surgical steel, which was the primary cutting material in a world without metal tools. Obsidian from the Teotihuacan workshops has been found at sites across a geographic range of more than 1,500 kilometers. The trade in obsidian alone would have generated enormous economic leverage. Add to that the production of pottery, textiles, lime plaster, and pigments, all documented archaeologically. And you have a city functioning as a manufacturing and distribution hub of regional significance. This is the picture that conventional scholarship offers. A large, well-organized, economically sophisticated urban center that rose to regional dominance through a combination of geographic advantage, skilled production, and effective trade networks. It lasted for roughly 5 centuries. Then, around 550 to 650 AD, something happened. The city did not fall to conquest. It did not flood or burn from external attack. What the archaeological record shows is a deliberate destruction, specifically of the ceremonial core. The temples along the Avenue of the Dead were burned and partially demolished, not the residential districts, not the market areas, the ritual center. The burning appears to have been carried out by the city's own inhabitants. After that, the population declined. Within a few generations, the city was largely empty. Why the citizens of one of the largest cities in the ancient world chose to systematically destroy their own religious infrastructure and then leave is a question the conventional narrative has not fully resolved. Set aside the political questions for a moment and focus on the physical objects. The Pyramid of the Sun is the third largest pyramid on Earth by volume. Its base measures approximately 220 by 230 meters, larger in footprint than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its current height is roughly 65 meters, though it likely originally stood taller before centuries of erosion and early 20th century excavation removed parts of its outer casing. The volume of fill material inside the pyramid, a mixture of adobe brick, rubble, and compacted earth, is estimated at around 1 million cubic meters. 1 million cubic meters, moving, mixing, and stacking that material by hand using woven baskets and wooden tools in an era with no wheeled vehicles and no draft animals capable of heavy hauling, required a labor mobilization of a scale that modern calculations suggest is almost difficult to fully picture. Researchers working on ancient construction logistics have estimated that building the Pyramid of the Sun would have required somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 workers, laboring continuously for roughly 30 years, depending on assumptions about work efficiency and seasonal labor patterns. The range is wide because the variables are genuinely uncertain. But even at the low end, organizing 3,000 workers across 3 decades, feeding them, housing them, coordinating their efforts, maintaining tool supply and material delivery, required an administrative infrastructure of considerable sophistication. We have found no administrative records, no tally sticks, no clay tablets, no painted codices documenting labor quotas or material inventories. If Teotihuacan kept administrative records, and a city of this scale and this duration almost certainly needed to, those records were kept in a medium that has not survived or have simply not yet been found. The planning precision embedded in the physical structure raises its own questions. The Pyramid of the Sun is oriented so that its west face aligns almost exactly with the point where the sun sets on 2 specific dates each year, May 17th and July 25th. These dates are exactly 105 days before and after the summer solstice, and they are separated by 260 days, the length of the sacred Mesoamerican ritual calendar. This is not a coincidence of rounding. The alignment is documented to within a fraction of a degree. Achieving that precision without modern survey instruments, using only the naked eye, horizon markers, and accumulated observational knowledge, requires a systematic astronomical tradition capable of tracking solar positions with high accuracy over multiple years. The evidence that such a tradition existed at Teotihuacan is abundant. Similar calendrical alignments have been identified in the orientation of the main avenue, in the positioning of the Pyramid of the Moon relative to the surrounding mountain Cerro Gordo, and in the spacing of structures along the Avenue of the Dead. The city was, among other things, a solar and astronomical instrument, its geometry encoding observations about the sky that would have required generations of careful documentation to achieve. The material sourcing for the construction presents its own complexity. The lime plaster that covered the pyramid surfaces, and by extension, virtually every major structure in the city, required burning limestone at high temperature to produce calcium oxide, then mixing and applying it before it set. The limestone itself had to be brought from deposits outside the basin of Mexico, since the immediate geological environment is predominantly volcanic. Transport, firing, and application of lime plaster across a city of 20 square kilometers in active construction represents a continuous industrial process of substantial scale. Analysis of the plaster samples from different construction phases shows consistent quality. The same firing temperature range, the same mixing ratios, across periods spanning several centuries. This consistency implies either a written technical tradition or an extremely stable apprenticeship system for lime production. No evidence of either has been directly recovered. What we are left with, once again, is the result. The pyramid stands. The plaster, where it survives, shows consistent quality. The astronomical alignment holds. The labor was organized and sustained across generations. The system that made all of this possible operated without leaving a legible record of its own mechanics. The question of who governed Teotihuacan has generated some of the most sustained and unresolved scholarly debate in Mesoamerican archaeology. The mainstream position, held by most researchers working on the site over the past several decades, is that Teotihuacan was governed by a collective or council-based authority, not a single divine king in the manner of contemporary Maya city-states. This interpretation is based largely on the absence of royal iconography. Maya cities of the same period are full of it: carved stelae depicting individual rulers, hieroglyphic texts naming kings and recording their lineages, tomb art identifying specific individuals by name and title. Teotihuacan has essentially none of this. The murals that cover its walls, and they are extensive, detailed, and clearly politically meaningful, depict priests, ritual specialists, feathered serpents, flowering trees, storm deities, and processions of figures. They do not depict a single identifiable ruler claiming divine authority. Not all researchers find the absence of royal imagery conclusive. A minority position, articulated by several scholars working on the iconographic evidence, holds that the apparent absence of individual ruler portraits may reflect a deliberate ideological choice rather than a genuine absence of individual political power. Some Mesoamerican political traditions emphasize the role over the person, the king's costume and regalia, rather than the king's face. Under this reading, the feathered serpent deity that appears throughout Teotihuacan iconography might represent a ruler's identity rendered symbolically rather than literally. This debate has real stakes. If Teotihuacan was governed collectively by a council of priests, merchants, or neighborhood leaders, it represents a model of ancient urbanism fundamentally different from the divine kingship that dominated most contemporaneous civilizations. If it was governed by a ruler system deliberately obscured by its own ideological conventions, the city fits more comfortably into familiar ancient political patterns, but raises questions about why its leadership made that specific representational choice. Neither position has been resolved by the physical evidence. A second related debate concerns the ethnic identity of the city's founders and primary population. The language spoken at Teotihuacan is unknown. The Nahuatl-speaking Aztecs who named the site came later and did not leave records of what they found. The writing system, if one existed, has not been deciphered. and whether Teotihuacan had a true writing system or only a partial notational system for recording specific categories of information is itself debated. Several candidate languages have been proposed. Some researchers have suggested the founders were ancestral speakers of Totonac, based on stylistic parallels with Gulf Coast material culture. Others have pointed toward Proto-Nahuan speakers on the grounds that later Nahuatl-speaking peoples maintained particularly strong mythological connections to Teotihuacan as a sacred origin site. A third group argues for a now extinct language with no surviving descendants. Each position has supporting evidence. None is conclusive. There is also a dating debate that receives less public attention than it deserves. The conventional construction timeline places the main pyramids in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. This dating is based on ceramic stratigraphy, the sequence of pottery styles found in different excavation layers, and on a small number of radiocarbon dates from organic material found in construction contexts. Some researchers have noted that the radiocarbon dates carry wider uncertainty margins than the ceramic dating implies, and that the two methods, when applied independently, do not always produce the same result. The discrepancies are not large. We are talking about decades, not centuries, but in a site where construction phasing is critical to understanding the sequence of development, those decades matter. The debates are not about fringe claims. They are being conducted in peer-reviewed literature, in Spanish and English, by archaeologists with long field experience at the site. What they collectively reveal is that our understanding of Teotihuacan, despite more than a century of excavation, remains significantly incomplete in ways that go beyond the absence of texts. In 2003, a heavy rainstorm opened a small sinkhole at the base of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, the third and smallest of Teotihuacan's main pyramids, located at the southern end of the Avenue of the Dead. Researchers investigating the sinkhole discovered that it opened into a tunnel. The tunnel was not a natural formation. It had been deliberately cut through the bedrock, the compacted volcanic tuff beneath the pyramid, to a depth of approximately 18 meters below the pyramid's floor. It extended roughly 103 meters in length, running from a point beneath the center of the plaza in front of the pyramid, all the way to a chamber beneath the pyramid's central axis. The tunnel was sealed. It had been sealed for roughly 1,800 years. Excavation began in 2009 and continued for years. What the team found inside, documented in detail and published in peer-reviewed reports, was extraordinary in its specificity. The walls and floor of the tunnel were coated with a powdered mineral called pyrite, iron sulfide, mixed with magnetite. The combination produces a reflective, glittering surface. Under torch or firelight, the tunnel would have appeared to shimmer, the walls catching and throwing light in a way that transformed the underground space into something that looked, in the words of one researcher's report, like a liquid surface, like water, like the primordial underworld waters that Mesoamerican cosmology associated with the origin of the world. This means the tunnel was not simply a structural feature. It was a designed ceremonial environment, engineered to produce a specific perceptual experience in the people who entered it. At the far end of the tunnel, beneath the pyramid's central axis, the excavators reached the terminal chambers. They found 4 sealed rooms. Inside, thousands of objects: rubber balls, jaguar remains, seeds, pottery, worked shells, wooden artifacts, rare survivors in Mesoamerica's humid climate, pyrite mirrors, greenstone figurines, and beneath all of this, the remains of a liquid that had pooled on the chamber floor and dried over the centuries. Analysis identified it as liquid mercury, cinnabar in its liquid form, which does not occur naturally in this geological environment. It had been brought here deliberately from a source outside the basin of Mexico. Mercury in that quantity, approximately 50,000 square centimeters of floor area covered, represents a logistical and material investment that signals extreme ritual importance. Liquid mercury was profoundly symbolic in Mesoamerican cosmology, associated with water, mirrors, and the reflective surface of the underworld. This reframes what we thought we understood about the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. The pyramid was not only an architectural monument, It was built over a ritual landscape that had been deliberately engineered underground, a landscape designed to be seen only by a select few under specific conditions and then sealed away permanently. The tunnel discovery had a second implication that was equally significant. The amount of labor required to excavate 103 meters of tunnel through bedrock, coat it with mineral compounds, fill it with curated objects, pool it with imported mercury, and then precisely seal it. This was not casual ritual activity. It was a major organized undertaking, planned and executed with the same deliberate precision visible in the pyramid above it, and it had been completely invisible to more than a century of archaeological work on the site. Which raises the possibility, stated carefully and without drama, that Teotihuacan still contains features we have not found. That the picture we currently have is not complete, that the scale of what is underground may be proportional to the scale of what is above it. Go back to the surface now and look at the Avenue of the Dead from a different angle. Satellite imagery and LiDAR analysis, aerial laser scanning that penetrates vegetation to reveal ground-level features, have been applied to the Teotihuacan site and its surrounding valley. The results have repeatedly shown that the city extended considerably farther than the archaeologically excavated zone suggests. Platforms, causeways, and building foundations extend outward from the ceremonial core in directions that the standard site maps do not fully capture. The city may have covered closer to 30 or even 40 square kilometers at its peak, substantially larger than the commonly cited 20 square kilometers. A larger city means a larger population. A larger population means a larger administrative apparatus. A larger administrative apparatus means more coordination, more specialized labor, more of the organizational infrastructure that should, in theory, leave archaeological traces. The absence of administrative records, the silence at the center of the Teotihuacan record, grows heavier as the city's apparent size grows larger. The main avenue itself contains a feature that has generated ongoing analysis. The avenue is not flat. It descends in a series of subtle steps from north to south, compensating for the natural slope of the valley floor. These steps, there are at least 15 of them, are cut into the avenue at irregular intervals, each one a precise adjustment to maintain the illusion of a level walkway when viewed from below. The visual result, when you walk the avenue from south to north, is that the Pyramid of the Moon appears to remain at the same height relative to the mountain behind it, regardless of how far you walk. The mountain frames the pyramid at a consistent visual angle because the avenue's step descent counteracts the perspective change that would normally occur as you approach. This is a sophisticated application of forced perspective, a designed visual effect embedded in the city's geometry. It cannot have been accidental. It required anticipating the viewer's experience from a specific vantage point and engineering the avenue's profile to produce a predetermined perceptual result. This reframes the Avenue of the Dead from a processional road into something more complex, a designed visual experience in which the relationship between viewer, avenue, pyramid, and mountain was calculated in advance and built into the landscape. Who calculated it and what instruments or methods they used is unknown. Teotihuacan does not exist in isolation. The deliberate alignment of ceremonial architecture with astronomical phenomena, specifically the 260-day ritual calendar, appears across Mesoamerica at sites with no direct connection to Teotihuacan. The same 105-day interval from solstice that governs the Pyramid of the Sun's orientation has been identified at other sites across the region, including Monte Alban in Oaxaca, which predates Teotihuacan's major construction by several centuries. This suggests the astronomical knowledge encoded at Teotihuacan was part of a broader Mesoamerican intellectual tradition, not a unique invention of this city's builders. What Teotihuacan added was scale. The precision applied at smaller ceremonial sites was applied here to pyramids of a size that had not previously existed in the region. The question of how accumulated astronomical knowledge gets transferred into construction at that scale, who does the translation from observational astronomy to survey practice to physical alignment, remains open. The underground tunnel beneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent also has parallels. though the Teotihuacan example is the most elaborate documented. Underground chambers associated with major pyramid structures appear at Palenque, at Tikal, and at several other Maya sites. In each case, the underground spaces are associated with royal burials or foundational ritual deposits. The consistent pattern, significant ritual activity, deliberately placed beneath the foundations of major surface monuments, implies a shared cosmological logic that treated the underground as a charged and meaningful space, not simply an engineering substrate. At Teotihuacan, the absence of royal burials in the tunnel chambers is what makes the parallel interesting. The chamber was filled with ritual objects, but no human remains were found that matched the profile of a ruler's burial. If the tunnel was not a tomb, it was something else. A cosmological statement, a ritual container, a deliberate encoding of underground space with meaning that served the city's foundational narrative rather than any individual's legacy. That distinction, if it holds, places Teotihuacan in a genuinely different political and cosmological category from the Maya cities whose underground features it otherwise resembles. The forced perspective engineering of the Avenue of the Dead also finds parallels in other ancient urban contexts, though rarely at this scale. The Sacred Way at Delphi in Greece was laid out to create specific visual relationships between approaching visitors and the Temple of Apollo. The grade of the path, the positioning of treasury buildings on either side, and the angle of the final approach were all calibrated to produce a specific progression of visual experiences. The Romans applied similar principles at the Capitoline Hill, where the approach to the temples was designed to reveal them incrementally rather than all at once. The civilizations that built Delphi, Rome, and Teotihuacan had no documented contact. The parallel is not evidence of transmission. It is evidence that the application of spatial psychology to ceremonial architecture, the deliberate engineering of how a visitor experiences approach and arrival, was a recurring insight that cultures arrived at independently when they had sufficient organizational capacity and sufficient reason to invest in large-scale public ritual space. What is distinctive about Teotihuacan is not that it did this, but the degree to which it integrated the technique into a city-scale plan. The visual effects are not localized to a single temple approach. They are embedded in a 4-kilometer axial corridor that organizes the entire ceremonial core. Discoveries once dismissed as minor have revised this picture more than once. When the tunnel beneath the Feathered Serpent Pyramid was first partially detected in the 1970s by a different research team, it was not pursued. The resources and technology available at the time were not adequate to excavate it safely, and the team moved to other priorities. 30 years later, the sinkhole reopened the question, and the technology had advanced sufficiently to answer it properly. The lesson is methodological, not mystical. What we know about Teotihuacan is constrained by what we have been able to look at with the tools available in the time that has been devoted to looking. The site has not been fully excavated. It may never be. The portion we have studied in detail represents a fraction of the total area, and underground features are by definition invisible until something brings them to the surface. Multiple interpretations remain viable for the major unresolved questions. Teotihuacan may have been governed by a priestly council whose authority rested on ritual knowledge rather than military power. It may have had a ruler class that simply chose a different mode of self-representation than neighboring cultures. It may have been a genuinely multi-ethnic urban collective that developed a civic identity strong enough to sustain half a millennium of coherent urban life without the organizing principle of a hereditary dynasty. Each of these interpretations fits the available evidence without requiring it. Here is what can be measured. The pyramid of the sun's astronomical alignment is calculable to within fractions of a degree. The volume of the pyramid is estimable from surveyed dimensions. The tunnel beneath the Feathered Serpent Pyramid has been excavated and documented in full. The extent of the mercury deposit can be calculated from the chamber floor area. The obsidian trade network can be traced through isotopic analysis of material found at distant sites. The construction phases of the main monuments can be bracketed within a century using ceramic stratigraphy. The population of the city can be estimated, roughly, from the density and extent of residential compounds, All of that is in the record, stable, verifiable. What cannot be reconstructed is the interior life of this civilization. We do not know what they believed about the cosmos, not in the way we know what the Maya believed, because the Maya left inscriptions. We do not know what they called their rulers, or whether the concept of ruler even mapped onto their political structure. We do not know what language they used to give instructions to the workers who moved 1 million cubic meters of fill into the pyramid of the sun. We do not know whether the astronomical alignments embedded in the city's geometry were understood as sacred, administrative, agricultural, or all three simultaneously. We do not know why they burned their own temples. That last gap is the one that sits most heavily. The burning of the ceremonial core around 550 to 650 AD is confirmed by archaeological evidence, fire-reddened stonework, collapsed roof debris, and the deliberate destruction of specific architectural features. The destruction was not random. It targeted the monuments most closely associated with the city's political and ritual authority. The platforms of the Avenue of the Dead, the adornments of the major pyramid complexes. Residential areas were largely undisturbed. The city's population did not all leave at once. Decline was gradual, spread over at least a generation or two after the burning. The most common interpretation is political collapse, an elite whose authority had become unsustainable, overthrown by a coalition of their own subjects. The burning of the temples, under this reading, was the symbolic destruction of a legitimizing ideology. You burn the gods of the people who ruled you. This interpretation is coherent. It fits the evidence, but it cannot be confirmed by the evidence because the evidence is material, and what we need to confirm the interpretation is textual. Someone's account of who did the burning, who ordered it, and what it was meant to accomplish. No such account exists. We can measure the degree of the fire's heat from the stone's discoloration. We cannot recover the anger, the calculation, or the grief of the people who set it. And this is the particular shape of the gap at Teotihuacan. It is not a gap in our ability to measure. It is a gap in our ability to know what the measurements meant to the people who made them. The pyramid's alignment encodes astronomical knowledge, but knowledge held for what purpose? Toward what end? In the service of what understanding of the universe? The tunnel's mercury pools in the underworld chamber, but what exactly did the people who poured that mercury believe they were doing, and for whom? The physical record is extraordinarily detailed. The interior record is almost completely silent. That silence is not the result of loss alone. It is also the result of choice. Whatever mode of record-keeping this civilization practiced, it was not the kind that survives in material form across 2 millennia. Whether that choice was about the medium, perishable materials rather than stone, or about the content, knowledge kept deliberately restricted and oral, or about something else entirely, we cannot say. What we can say is that a civilization organized enough to align a pyramid to within fractions of a degree of a calendrical solar position, to design an underground ceremonial environment with imported mercury, and to sustain a population of 125,000 people across 5 centuries was not organizationally primitive. Whatever knowledge sustained that system was elaborate, maintained and transmitted. It simply did not reach us. Walk back out onto the Avenue of the Dead. It is early morning. The sun is coming in from the east, and the shadows of the eastern platforms fall long and precise across the avenue's stone surface. The Pyramid of the Moon is ahead of you, framed by Cerro Gordo, the mountain sitting behind it as if placed there deliberately, which, in a sense, it was. The city's builders chose this location partly because of how that mountain frames the northern skyline. Around you, the site is quiet. The tourist groups have not yet arrived. The vendors are still setting up at the southern entrance. There is just the stone and the light and the geometry. The grid of streets receding into the distance on both sides of you, the stepped platform edges catching the morning light at precise angles. The people who laid out this geometry are gone. Not obscured by history, not waiting to be discovered in a sealed archive, not recoverable through better technology, simply gone. The knowledge they held, the calculations behind the alignments, the organizational system that moved the material, The beliefs that made an underground tunnel filled with mercury a meaningful act existed in minds that no longer exist, in a language no one now speaks. What they left is geometry. And the geometry is meticulous. Stand at the center of the avenue and look south. Then look north. The avenue does not waver. It holds its bearing across 4 kilometers of valley floor with an accuracy that modern survey equipment confirms and that the naked eye, even without confirmation, can sense. Someone stood here 2,000 years ago and looked along this same line. What they saw ahead of them, what they believed about the mountain, the pyramid, the avenue, the sky, we cannot know. The avenue has outlasted the meaning it was built to carry. The geometry survived. The interior life that generated the geometry did not. And that gap, between the precision of what they built and the completeness of our silence about who they were, is perhaps the most honest thing Teotihuacan offers us. Not a mystery in the sense of a puzzle waiting for a solution. A mystery in the older sense. Something that has been set before you, deliberate and exact, and that you are not yet equipped to fully read. The pyramid holds the light of the morning, the same way it has held every morning for 2,000 years. What were they watching for when they built it to face that light?